She scratched at her arms until they bled, whispering, "He's still inside, he's always inside." When the doctors asked who she meant, the little girl just smiled and said, "He lives under my skin." She was only 7 when the whispers began. At first, her parents thought it was just a phase. Imaginary friends, the kind children invent to cope with boredom or loneliness. Ellie had always been a quiet, thoughtful child, with a habit of staring too long at shadows and corners. But after that afternoon visit to the abandoned house at the edge of Maple Ridge, something about her changed. Subtly at first. She came home silent, her clothes dirt-smudged, her shoes soaked from the dew-drenched grass, and a strange little grin tugging at the corner of her mouth. When her mother asked her what she'd been doing, Ellie simply said, "He told me a secret," and walked away. The first real warning sign came 3 nights later. Her parents woke to a soft scratching noise in the hallway outside their bedroom. Mark got up, assuming it was the dog, only to find Ellie crouched in the dark, dragging her fingernails across the wood-paneled wall. When he called her name, she turned around slowly, her eyes glassy, her lips twitching. "He's watching," she whispered. "He's in the walls." They took her to the doctor the next day, who said it was likely a sleep disorder. Night terrors. Maybe the early onset of some anxiety condition. Kids often express stress in strange ways, especially imaginative ones like Ellie. Limit her screen time, the pediatrician advised. Make sure she feels safe at night. But it wasn't screen time. Ellie hadn't watched a single cartoon in days. She refused to go near the television. Instead, she'd sit cross-legged in the middle of her room, whispering softly to someone who wasn't there. She started drawing obsessively, strange black crayon sketches of twisted trees and what looked like bodies with too many limbs. And always, in the margins, there was a small figure drawn over and over again. A faceless man with long fingers and ribs that seemed to grow outside his body. One morning, Ellie came down to breakfast with long raw scratches across her arms. When her mother gasped and asked what had happened, Ellie looked up with a dead serious expression and said, "He's trying to get out. He doesn't like being stuck in me." From that point on, sleep became a battle. She'd scream if the lights were turned off, cry if left alone for even a minute. Her bedsheets were stained with blood from scratching. They tried giving her gloves, but she'd tear them off. Sometimes she'd wake up in strange places, under the table, inside the bathtub, once even standing barefoot in the front yard at 3 a.m., her eyes wide open but completely unseeing. Mark and Sarah Donovan kept a journal to track everything. Entry after entry blurred into one another. More drawings, more whispers, more nights where they'd wake up to her staring silently at them from the doorway. One chilling morning, Sarah found Ellie standing over her while she slept, her face just inches away. When asked what she was doing, she replied, "He wanted to see if your skin was soft." Sarah tried therapy. Mark called in a child psychiatrist who specialized in trauma and dissociative disorders. But Ellie wouldn't talk. Not until the second session, when the psychiatrist, a kind older man named Dr. Lansing, leaned forward gently and asked, "Ellie, why are you hurting yourself?" She tilted her head, smiled. "I'm not," she said. "He is. He doesn't like me much. But he needs me to stay alive." Dr. Lansing pressed further. "Who is he?" She didn't answer right away. Just scratched her arms slowly, methodically, as if trying to peel something off her skin. Then she leaned in close and whispered, "He lives under my skin. He likes it warm." That was the last session. Dr. Lansing excused himself abruptly, face pale. He later called Sarah to suggest a second opinion, but wouldn't say more. That night, Ellie had another episode. Screaming, crying, clawing at her arms and stomach until the skin broke. She had to be restrained gently in a blanket. Her voice changed while she thrashed, deeper, angrier. "I'll come out when I'm ready," it growled. "She's just a cage." The neighbors started asking questions. One even accused them of abuse. The school called multiple times due to Ellie's disturbing drawings. One teacher found a crumpled paper in the trash showing a child being skinned alive by a tall, faceless figure. Mark began sleeping with the bedroom door locked. Sarah found a note in Ellie's handwriting tucked inside her pillowcase. Read. "He said he used to live in another boy, but that boy died. I'm stronger than him. I won't die. But he's angry. I think he's starting to like me too much." The final straw came when Ellie, sitting calmly at the dinner table, reached out, grabbed her mother's hand and whispered, "He thinks you'd make a better home." The room went silent. Mark stood up slowly, blood draining from his face. Ellie just smiled. Then, without breaking eye contact, she scratched a deep line down her forearm and licked the blood off her fingers. "He likes the taste," she said. And with that, the family realized, Whatever had changed in Ellie wasn't just mental. It wasn't something they could explain with disorders or trauma. Something had entered her. Something ancient, cruel, and patient. And it was still growing. Mark Donovan wasn't the kind of man who believed in the supernatural. He believed in data, structure, cause and effect. As Ellie unraveled before their eyes, he clung to science like a life raft. But there was a point when science stopped answering, and that point came the day he returned from work to find his daughter huddled in the corner of her room, whispering into her arm as if it had a mouth. That night, Mark sat in the living room long after Sarah had gone to bed, Ellie's sketchpad resting on his lap. He flipped through page after page of increasingly grotesque drawings. The faceless man, the crooked house, the child with hollow eyes and ribs like cages. One image stopped him cold, a drawing of a staircase leading downward into darkness, with the words "Don't go where he waits" written above it in crude block letters. He recognized that staircase. It was in the basement of the Greystone house. 2 weeks earlier, the family had passed the dilapidated building during a Sunday drive. Ellie had begged to get out. "I want to see the hollow place," she said. Mark hadn't thought much of it, just a child's curiosity. The house was old, boarded up, half sunk into the ground with vines choking the walls. He'd assumed she just liked the look of it. But what if something had happened there? Something real? He started digging. Greystone House, as it turned out, had a history far darker than urban legends let on. Buried in a forgotten corner of the local archives, Mark found references to a missing child, a boy named Samuel Hawthorne who vanished in 1958. He was 7 years old, just like Ellie. The case was cold, long dismissed as a runaway or presumed dead. But there were notes, disturbing ones, from interviews with Samuel's mother. She claimed her son had started acting strange weeks before his disappearance. He talked to the walls, scratched himself raw and said things like, "He found me," and "My skin is hollow now." The local doctor had dismissed it as schizophrenia or possession, depending on who you asked. Eventually, Samuel simply vanished one night from his locked bedroom. The window had been bolted shut from the inside. No prints, no signs of forced entry. In one of the old photos, Mark saw something that made his stomach turn. A crayon drawing from Samuel, uncannily similar to Ellie's. Same faceless figure. Same elongated fingers. Same ribs protruding outward like jagged wings. Desperate, Mark located the retired detective who had worked the case. A man named Harold Trask, now in his 80s and living 2 towns over. When Mark showed him Ellie's drawings, Trask's hands trembled. He called it the Hollow Man, said it was a name whispered by more than one child over the decades, always after visiting that cursed house. "It's not a ghost," Trask muttered. "It's older. Something that slithers through skin and minds. It doesn't haunt buildings. It haunts people." Mark asked if it could be stopped. Trask just looked at him and said, "Samuel's mother ended up in a psychiatric ward. She tore off pieces of her own skin trying to find where it went in. You're already too late." Still, Mark needed more. He returned to the Greystone house alone. The place felt wrong the moment he stepped inside, not dangerous in a physical sense but deeply sick. The air was heavy, the floorboards groaned like they were complaining. Every step echoed too loudly like the house was listening. The basement door was hidden behind a broken bookshelf. He pushed it aside and descended slowly, flashlight trembling in his hand. The air grew colder the deeper he went, and the scent, something like mold and meat, thickened around him. When he reached the bottom, he found the staircase from Ellie's drawing. It ended in a dirt floor and crumbling stone walls. Carved into one wall were dozens of tiny handprints, as if children had pressed their palms into wet concrete. But worse than that was the writing. Scrawled into the stone, over and over again, in what looked disturbingly like fingernail scratches, was a phrase. "I live in the hollow parts." Beneath it, a single drawing was etched, not with a child's hand but with purpose and rage. A figure, hollow-chested, its limbs wrapped in skin that didn't seem to fit. It had no face, but its eyes were everywhere, drawn into the ribs, the hands, even the floor beneath its feet. Mark stumbled back, bow rising in his throat. And then he heard it, soft, almost gentle, the voice of a child, not Ellie, not any child he'd ever heard, whispering from somewhere in the dark. "She fits better than I thought." He fled. Didn't look back. Drove home in silence, fists clenched so tight his knuckles went white. When he got back, Ellie was sitting at the table, smiling. "I told him you'd visit," she said. Mark stared at her, heart hammering in his chest. "Was he there?" she asked. He couldn't speak. Ellie leaned forward, voice sweet as honey. "He likes when you know his name." Ellie was no longer Ellie. That realization hit Sarah hardest one night when she heard the child laughing, deep, guttural, not the sound a little girl should ever make. She rushed to the bedroom and found Ellie standing in front of the mirror, completely still. Her head tilted as though listening to something. Then she started speaking in a low voice that wasn't hers. Not in pitch, not in cadence. It was adult, old and thick with something ancient. "He's almost done with her," the voice said through Ellie's lips. She fought longer than the others. But her skin is soft and her mind was so quiet. "He made a home there." The glass cracked. Sarah didn't scream. She just backed out of the room and locked the door. In the following days, Ellie grew quieter. Not like before, not withdrawn, not anxious. She simply observed. Her eyes followed people too carefully. She mimicked their voices, repeated their words moments after they were spoken. She began drawing less, but what she did sketch was even worse. Detailed anatomical renditions of human skin peeled back like fruit, faces half-formed with empty sockets, and hollow silhouettes looming behind children's beds. Mark didn't sleep anymore. Neither did Sarah. They kept a rotation watching Ellie in shifts. The pediatrician stopped answering their calls. The psychiatrist had already backed out. They turned to the church. The priest who agreed to visit lasted 15 minutes before leaving, pale and trembling. "She is not possessed," he whispered. "Something far worse. Something that invites you in even as it hides." They tried everything, blessings, symbols, oils, mantras, locks, cameras. Nothing stopped it. Ellie started talking in her sleep again, except now it wasn't random whispers. It was names. Dozens of them. Some Sarah recognized as children who had gone missing in nearby towns over the last few decades. Names the news had long forgotten. Then one morning, Ellie didn't wake up. She lay in bed, breathing shallowly, eyes open but unfocused. When they touched her, she twitched like something inside her body didn't belong there anymore. The skin on her arms was raw, almost translucent from scratching. Her heartbeat was erratic. The doctors ran tests, blood work, scans. Everything came back normal. Maybe psychological trauma, one urologist offered. Possibly a fugue state. But no one could explain the new X-ray that showed hundreds of hairline fractures in her ribcage, like something was trying to push its way out from inside. That night, Mark sat by her bedside, holding her hand as she lay silent. At exactly 3:33 a.m., Ellie's eyes shifted toward him. She smiled. "I'm ready now," she said. Mark froze. "Ready for what?" Ellie turned her head toward the window. "He's almost done being me." The next morning, Ellie was gone. The house had been locked. Windows bolted. No signs of forced entry. No footprints. Only a single message written in blood on the wall above her bed. "I set him free." The police launched a manhunt. Amber alerts. Volunteers. Helicopters. Canine units. Nothing. Not a single piece of clothing, not a strand of hair. Only her last drawing remained, slipped under her pillow. It was a sketch of their family, but Mark and Sarah were skinless, empty mannequins. And Ellie? Ellie had become the faceless man. The town mourned. The Donovans withdrew. Sarah left Mark within 6 months, unable to stay in the house. Unable to live with the silence. Mark stayed behind, clinging to guilt, obsessively researching similar cases, trying to make sense of it. He created a timeline, documented patterns, and found that this entity, whatever it was, moved from child to child, always 7 years old, always after proximity to a particular place or object. Greystone House was just one of its nests. There were others. It spread like mold, creeping into the minds of the vulnerable, quiet ones. It didn't kill them immediately. It inhabited them, sometimes for weeks, sometimes longer, until it had learned to walk like them, talk like them, wear them. Then it left, to find the next home. Years passed. Mark eventually stopped hearing from Sarah. He stopped speaking to reporters. But he never stopped watching. Following missing children's cases across the country. Looking for the signs, the drawings, the scratching, the phrase, "He lives under my skin." And then one day in a small town in Ohio, a local news story caught his attention. A family had reported strange behavior from their daughter. 7 years old. After moving into a new home, she started waking up at night, screaming. Her arms were scratched. When asked why, she said, "He wants to wear me now." Mark read the article over and over. In one photograph he saw the girl's sketch pinned to a fridge. It was of a crooked man with no face, standing behind her family at the dinner table. He printed the photo and added it to the wall of his study, where hundreds of others like it were tacked and connected by red string. He wrote down the date. Then, beneath it, in ink that quivered in his hand, He added a final line. He's not done. He just moved on.